Hi, I'm Alistair Ross from Revolution InfoSec. Thanks for coming along to watch this video on our business. This is our website, revolutioninfosec.com, and you can see along the top of the webpage we have four main areas of services. This offering really starts with risk-based cybersecurity, and I'll click on that first of all to give you an idea of what it is that we do. And everything that we do starts from this one area. Now, in order to give our clients the best service that we possibly can, we always start with identifying risk. If we and the customer knows very well what risks lie in the business, then we can really help to protect the customer against any particular aspects of risk. So, for example, we first start out with risk appetite profiling. What does that mean? Well, that means that we try and understand the customer's own level of acceptable risk. Now, obviously, nobody wants to be on the front pages of the headlines saying that some terrible ransomware attack happened or they had some terrible cyber event that really ruined their business. But down the line, somewhere along that scale, the business has an acceptable level of risk. So that's what we call risk appetite profiling. We also offer complementary services, as you can see along here: compliance and privacy strategy, cybersecurity strategy and investment planning, and so forth. But realistically, what we really want to get to do with a client first in an ideal world is this asset-based risk assessment. So I'll dive into the risk assessment service first, because that really leads into everything else we do, whether it's security testing, whether it's training, or whether it's some other specialist services that we offer. So let me go into asset-based risk assessment and you'll see what I mean with that. So here I've got a small presentation for you and I'll just click onto that right now. Okay. So I'm going to talk about why your business might need a cybersecurity risk assessment, what it's all about, and I'll give you the finer details of that in a very quick presentation. So first of all, what is a risk assessment? Well, our risk assessment is kind of like in New Zealand what we call a warrant of fitness. In other countries we call an MOT or other terminology. Basically, I'm talking about your car. You take your car in once every year or so for a health checkup to make sure that your car is running in a state which is roadworthy. Well, your business needs to be roadworthy in terms of cybersecurity. And it's all about risk and making sure that the risk is not here where what we call the blast radius could take out the entire business. We want to mitigate that blast radius, so we mitigate that risk right down to the smallest area. So it's taking the blast radius from here right down to something as small as we possibly can. So that's what a risk assessment is, and we'll do it over assets. So we identify the assets with you in your business. What are assets? I think it's important to understand that assets aren't just physical things. They are a whole bunch of things which include people, processes, policies, data, and finally technology. A lot of people just assume that when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about tech. That's absolutely not the case, and that's why Revolution InfoSec really like to go with a business-to-business approach or a business-to-organization approach rather than a technology-based one. Very different to how a lot of cybersecurity businesses start their approach. So let's look into why you need a cybersecurity risk assessment. Well, this is a statistic from Cisco and it was performed in March of 2023. And basically they looked at how prepared the organizations within New Zealand and all across the globe, in actual fact, but this one's specific to New Zealand, 86% of New Zealand businesses are not prepared for a cybersecurity incident. And that's pretty damning. Now, on top of that, we saw that according to IBM in June of 2023, there is an average loss fiscally of 4.45 million US dollars per cyber event. That's a massive amount, and that's the average. So that's just the fiscal loss that a business could have. The reality is that a lot of businesses worry about something much more important, which is the reputational damage. Obviously, your organization has a level of trust that you might build up over months, years, or decades with your clients, and that could immediately be destroyed by having a cyber event. So it's really important to make sure that that cyber event really doesn't penetrate your business, exploiting your data and particularly your clients. So that's why it's so important to make sure you protect yourself against a cyber event. So let's have a look at the steps that are involved in a risk assessment. There are 5 steps, but before we begin on those 5 steps, we, as I said, really want to work out what your risk posture is. So as I said before, that's really understanding your acceptable level of risk. So once we've established that with you in consultancy, we work out everything in the NIST 800 standard for the 5-step assessment, and that is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So in the identification aspect, we're looking at your assets that you have. Now, you may already have your assets understood in your business, but some businesses may have an asset register and they may also have a risk register, but not all businesses in our experience have them combined into a proper risk and asset register. So what we do is we look at the CIA values, and I'll come back to what the CIA values are in at the moment, but basically it's really, really important to understand all of those processes, policies, data, technology, and physical assets that your business has before we move on to the rest. Without doing that, we're blind, and so are you. So once we've understood what those assets we have to identify are, we then go about how do we protect those assets. So we can develop those safeguards in step with you. Then we move on to the detect, and basically that's about having a detection plan. How do we actually know that a cyber event has happened? So we have the technologies and the processes in place to deal with a cyber event, the detection thereof. And the following 2 stages are really about how, as a business or an organization, we respond and then also recover from a cyber event. So let's have a look at those in a little bit more detail. So first of all, the identify. As I say, we need to understand the assets within the organization and the level of risk that they may hold. So to do that, we have a list of all of the assets. Now those, again, physical, their data, their technology, their people, their processes, policies, procedures, all of those things in a big list of assets. And then we look at dealing with the risk of those assets. What would happen if something that you deemed confidential all of a sudden became lost, or it was given out in a land where it's no longer confidential? It's been put in the public domain, and obviously that was by mistake, or a cyber event happened where it was put out in the public domain. Would that be a bad thing, or a not so bad thing, or potentially benign? Again, you as the business owners or the stakeholders within the business, you are the best people to understand whether the loss of confidentiality over a given asset is important or not. So you can score the C of the confidentiality, the C for confidentiality of the CIA. Then the next part is integrity, and integrity is basically understanding how it would be, let's say, for example, a data file, a document. So say you were a subject of a ransom attack and the data on your computers was encrypted, and then the ransom had gone away, and then the data was now back on your computers. Okay, so the document file was there before the ransom attack, and now it's back again, and everything seems okay. But can you verify 100% that the integrity of that data is still as is? Can you say it is 100% the same as it was before the ransom attack? And if the answer is 100% absolutely yes, that's great. But the reality of something like that is that you probably can't say hand on heart that the integrity is there. So the question to you is, what is the outcome of the loss of integrity? Is in this particular asset, is that okay? Is it bad or is it not so bad? And again, you can come up with a particular score of the integrity of that particular asset. And then finally, the availability. What happens if that particular asset that was around suddenly goes away and cannot come back? So if you don't have a backup of a particular file or document which you feel is important to the organization, what happens if that availability of that asset now goes away? Is that again important or not important? And so once we have a score for the CIA values, then we can say that probably has this particular level of risk associated with that. Now we have a picture of the assets coupled with the risks that are inherent to each of those assets. And that is when we can identify your overall risk strategy. Okay, so that's where we're going with the identify phase. Next, we move on to the protect phase. So this is basically working through safeguards to protect the organization and the information that your organization has. So we look at understanding who has access to the relevant assets and the information. Think about not only just the people within your organization, but third parties and vendors too. For example, if you use SaaS-based solutions in the cloud or so forth, they also have access to the information that you store in the cloud. And what happens if that organization is the result of a cyber breach? So you have to think about these things, and then how do we deal with protecting that information? Does that organization have appropriate measures to protect that information? And then we look at how we can ensure sensitive data is protected by sufficient encryption methods, as well as access controls such as multi-factor authentication. And then we'll understand looking after those assets, such as patching them regularly and making sure that there are policies and processes in place to make sure that they are patched and kept up to date. And then finally, look at any backup and disaster recovery strategy that we have and ensure that that is up to date and fit for purpose. Next, we move on to the detect. Now, this is all about basically when we have a cyber event, can we actually see that a cyber event has happened? Unbelievably, there is a statistic, and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's something like over 200 days after a cyber event has happened on an organization's network that we actually begin to understand that it has happened. And anything in excess of half a day probably is far too long. So we want to make sure that rather than taking 200 days to find out that a breach has happened or a cyber event has happened, we want to find that out as quickly as possible. So this is what this detect phase is all about. So what we often do first of all is we look at the overall picture of your external and internal presence. This is depending on the scope of our engagement. We can perform a vulnerability assessment on your external and potentially internal presence. So for example, if you've got websites, web apps, mobile apps, they are external presences, and we can scan those for any known vulnerabilities and report back on those to you and offer potentially to resolve those issues. We look at any existing detection processes or solutions and understand if those also are fit for purpose. We understand the impact of any cybersecurity events and ensure that any logging is in place. And that's a big aspect to detecting a cybersecurity incident. Really, we might have logging, but what are we actually doing with those logs? Are we monitoring those logs for a particular incident happening? So that's the detect phase. And then we have the respond phase. What do we do if we actually see an incident happening on our infrastructure? How do we respond to that? And a big aspect about this is what's called a security incident response plan. Your organization may have a security incident response plan already in place, but if you don't, then we can provide guidance on how to set that up for your organization. And every organization has slightly different techniques and tactics on their security incident response plan. And so we will help customize that plan for your organization. Then we have to test that plan to make sure it is in line with requirements, and also look at coordinating a response plan with internal and external stakeholders as well as potential customers. And then finally, in the event of a cyber event, we have to deal with how we actually recover from that event. So again, aspects about how we communicate with internal, external stakeholders as well as clients. Then we ensure that we can actually recover. So for example, a business continuity and recovery plan needs to be in place and is up to date. And so, for example, things like backups really are important. So, for example, we need to know that the backups actually work. So when we restore from backup, there is data that is back in place and the integrity of those backups is sound. And finally, we need to make sure that you have some sort of plan about how to deal with the public relations fallout and your company's reputation over a particular cyber incident. So those are the 5 steps of our cyber review process. And so just in review of that, why do we want to do this? A cyber event can happen to any organization at any time. It might be a huge big incident, it might be a medium-sized incident, it might be something quite small. But regardless, you need to be prepared for any incident happening at any moment. And obviously what we want to do, as I said at the beginning, really we don't want a big incident happening which completely brings everything to a halt in your business. We want to deal with it, so we bring it down and mitigate it as much as possible. So the assessment discovers and significantly reduces risk that you might have. How is it done? Well, we deal with this 5-phase NIST aligned framework, and we provide that consultancy with you and your stakeholders to prepare the business for the cyber events that may happen, and we also deliver, when we're finished, the findings report. We also deal with remediation. So for example, whilst we're dealing with you on this consultancy, we might provide a remediation plan. So for example, if we found a server which is open on the internet, which is vulnerable to particular issues, then we might suggest and provide a response to that, saying that we'll patch these particular issues so that the server is now secure for ongoing basis. Finally, as we know, cybersecurity is not something that is just a one and done thing. We want to make sure that you have some sort of ongoing support with all of these things. And that's where our vCISO service provides ongoing governance. So that's another aspect to our service provision that we can help you with. So that is our Cybersecurity Risk Assessment service. So get in touch with us. sales@revolutioninfosec.com is our email address. You can phone us here, or you can get us on our website, revolutioninfosec.com. I'll just show you briefly a few of our other services. So for example, if we go on to the security testing aspect, we have a number of security testing services, such as web and mobile vulnerability assessments. We have penetration testing services and threat prevention and detection improvements. So for example, one of those services is the vulnerability assessment service, and you would get a report like this showing any vulnerabilities that we found with your external or internal presence. And this is aligned with the ISO standards and shows you the risk level that your organization might be exposed to for any findings that it has. And it will provide you an executive summary. For example, this downloadable version, which you can have a look at here, it shows you your rank, and in this particular case it was a medium-low rank, and it shows you all of the information it gathers in 2 sections. One, the open source intelligence gathering aspect, and then secondly, the vulnerabilities aspect itself. And you can see these ones are ranked informational, but then it goes down in terms of severity, saying that these are minimal, and then moderate, and then there's significant risks and so forth, and then on to the vulnerability assessment. So that's part of the vulnerability assessment service that we offer. These are highly competitive services, and then we offer training as well. Our organization provides in-person and web-based video tuition, as well as a number of specialist services, and we'll be growing these services over the next few months. So stay tuned to our website, revolutioninfosec.com. Thank you very much for watching.